I think when we see other people and hear other people and are working with others who, have similarities to us, it's easy for us to look at someone else and say, look at all the amazing things they're doing. And, oh, why are they being so hard on themselves? And you see that enough and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute. I think other people are maybe thinking the same thing about what I'm saying. And I think that's why I'm such a huge fan of community and group-based work with ADHD. Because I think when we see ourselves and others, it's way easier to first give compassion to others. And I think that when you're doing that long enough, it's almost like a default where you just begin to give yourself that self-compassion, right? It's sort of that idea of like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of beating myself up. It's not helping.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Today, I have my friend and fellow ADHD coach and licensed clinical social worker, Eric Tivers. A lot of you have probably heard him on the ADHD Rewired podcast. He's the founder and CEO of ADHD Rewired. And since 2014, he's produced over 500 episodes on his podcast. That's a lot of commitment, people. He's a leader in providing online group coaching and community-based growth programs for adults with ADHD. And Eric's coaching and accountability groups were recognized at the 2019 International Conference on ADHD as an Innovative Program of the Year. And I remember meeting you there and being very intimidated by you. Eric also runs a virtual co-working program for adults with ADHD called Adult Study Hall. And you could learn more about him at ADHD Rewired at ADHDrewired.com. He has a lot of background, bachelor's in social work at Bradley University, his master's in social work at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's a dad to a neurodivergent 12-year-old. He's a self-taught musician. Wow. And in his free time, he loves seeing live music, especially Fish, which he's seen 54 times, my friends. No obsession there at all.
with 4 more coming up in February. I'm seeing them in Mexico again.
Oh my gosh. Well, we know that if you love something with ADHD, there is no lack of motivation and dopamine there. So, wow. And then when you're not riding your motorcycle, you might find him on the pickleball courts or playing 18 holes of frisbee golf. How cool. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much, Brooke.
So I've already seen in your bio some ADHD symptoms here, but also some ADHD superpowers, in my opinion. The fact that you can literally just stay focused on something that you love, regardless of what happens, whether COVID happens like it's happening to you. You showed up to this podcast and you're still doing what you love doing. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, when you learned you had ADHD.
I was diagnosed when I was 19 after I almost failed out of college. That was, so the story of that is my freshman year of college. I was a sort of undeclared communications and advertising major, and my first semester I got a 2.2 GPA, and going to private school, my parents were like, you need to get those grades up or you are coming home because we're not paying this tuition if those are the kinds of grades you're going to get. And I'm like, fair, okay. So the next semester I really worked like really, really hard. I found the library. I like to say that I opened up more books than beers that semester. I really like turned everything around, or so I thought, because I ended up doing worse. I got a 1.8 that semester. And
tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, it was, I think part of it was I didn't have the skills to really know how to manage my time. When I would read, I would be reading the stuff I needed to do, and I was just not processing what I was reading. Writing was a real struggle for me. So I had this grant money. I got a letter about that was basically said, you have one more semester to get it up or you lose it. And so with sort of that and sort of my power of persuasion, I was able to convince my parents to give me one more chance at college. I had a dinner with someone. I wish I could actually remember who it was, because like I've been wanting to thank this person for the last 20 years. And they told me about that they were diagnosed with ADHD, and they were describing some of the struggles that they had. And it was like,
Mm,
for the first time in my life, I was like, this person's describing what it's like inside my brain, like in a way that I'd never heard anybody else talk about before. And particularly around like the reading, and like where they would, the way they described it was exactly how I would describe the challenges that I would have with reading. It's that I would start reading something and it would trigger a thought about something, and now I'm thinking about that thought, and then that thought triggers two other thoughts, and then those two thoughts trigger four other thoughts. Now I'm still reading all the words on the page, but I am not processing a single word of what I'm reading. So I would get to the end of whatever I had to
totally.
read and go, okay, I read what I was supposed to read. I have no idea what I just read.
I did it
So
though.
yeah, but I did it. It was that. And then the other piece was like, unless I was interested in something, like I could not get myself to really focus on it. Like it was seemed impossible. Or if it was not like the last minute crunch time of like where the adrenaline is kicking in, like I couldn't get myself to work on it. It was like, wait, so that's not normal? This is not what people do? So I went and got an evaluation in the first week back at my university. And I remember the psychiatrist who evaluated me says like, no one's ever identified you as having ADHD before. I'm like, it's like, you're kind of off the charts here. I was like, thanks, I think.
Like it's so obvious to me. How can
Uh,
you not see it?
well, and part of it was because I had inattentive ADHD, right? So I wasn't like hyperactive and bouncing off the walls. I had some impulsivity, but it was primarily that inattentive, where I'm, daydreaming and
Mhm.
disorganized, and have a hard time with planning and all of that. So I got the diagnosis. I got prescribed Adderall, and I still like that first day taking Adderall was I look at it as like pre that day and post that day, because it was a day that like changed everything for me. So I was in my my college room, and at the time I switched majors my sophomore year to social work was my major, and then sociology was my minor. And I was reading this book called, the title of the book was Crested Kimono. And the only reason why that's relevant was because I still remember it.
Okay.
Right. And so it was about like the Japanese, like comparative business family. And it was the first time I had ever read something that I got to the end of a chapter and like I knew what I had just read. And it's like, this was 24 years ago, and I still get like choked up telling the story, because it's like, wait, I
I
can
did
learn.
something.
Well, it was, I always had this feeling of like, why is it like I don't think that I'm dumb, but I often felt dumb, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
why are certain things so hard? Why can't I just kind of get it? When I got to did this reading, I was like, oh my God, I just felt like I have a chance here at college. And like, it was a really kind of emotional moment for me. I remember I closed that book, got to the end of this chapter, and I just started bawling. Like it was like, I think I like was ugly crying of like, why didn't I know beforehand? Like, why did it take all of this like pain and struggle? And like school was so hard beforehand. And it's like, what were certain things I would just get quickly and intuitively. But like when it came to sort of academic stuff, it was just like, it was just so hard.
Wow.
So I got my Adderall, went from a cumulative 2.0 GPA my freshman year to everything after that was about a 3.75, which I had never gotten A's in my life. Like, and so I was getting really good grades. Then and I say that my sophomore year, right, like that first semester after diagnosis, was also where my perfectionism was born, because it was like, oh, I can be successful and do well.
And
And
never
and that,
struggle again.
well,
Right?
I wouldn't say that.
Right?
um
I'm perfect
but
now.
my strategy was, it was kind of like a brute force strategy of like, I'm just gonna be hours and hours and hours and hours in the library. And I think because I had never really done well academically up to that point, there was this sort of identity piece for me that was like, I can do well. and I have to keep doing well. And so, that following semester, then I added an anxiety medication because I was,
Mm-hmm.
and which I didn't care for because I kind of felt like I was on cloud nine and a little bit indifferent about
No,
stuff. But I'm like, I have inattentive ADHD. I don't need anything to help with indifference because it's
there's
like,
enough indifference there.
right. And so, throughout college, like I did well undergrad. It took me 5 years to finish, but I did well, on paper. But when I kind of look back at like, well, what did it actually take me to do well? I wish I can go back in time and do it over again. I wish I had the skills. I wish I learned I didn't have to do everything perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next, 10, 15 years, I was kind of working on the undoing this whole idea of looking at my self-worth based on what I'm accomplishing. Right. And I'm still working on that, and I've come a long way, but it's like, it still pops up for me sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like in grad school, I finished with the 4.0. And I was like, at the time I was like, yes, I'm the smartest ADHDer. I'm so proud. It's like, and now I'm like, wait a minute. I slept like 2 hours a night through all of grad school. Like it, and I look back at that, I'm like, I actually wish I did worse.
What would you be doing if you did worse?
Sleeping. I was sleeping 2 hours a night. Like, and I used to joke saying that I think that grad students should be in the DSM. I think it was just more of like how I was doing grad school should be in the DSM, right? Like, because it
Yeah.
was, and I was talking to someone in one of my classes who was a parent, also had a job, and was doing an internship. And I was just like, wait, how do you sleep? She's like, yeah. Like, how do you manage all this? Like, and they tell me, well, I don't read everything we're supposed to read for grad school. I'm like, wait, what?
You're allowed to do that?
Like, and it was at the very end of grad school, and I was like, wait, people don't read everything they're assigned, because it was like 500 pages of like thick clinical text a week, right? It's lots and lots of reading.
So, would you consider yourself a rule follower now still?
It's funny, I don't really think of myself as a rule follower. Like, I follow the rules that make sense to me, and the ones that don't, I'm like, well, that's stupid. I think part of it was like I enjoy the process of learning, and I was really interested in what I was doing, and like I think I really value that idea of like mastery, and so I really like I wanted to go in deep and not half-ass it. I don't know. I think that there was also this just like, oh, like trying to prove to myself what I could do.
Mm-hmm. For the first time.
Yeah, as someone who struggled through the first 12 plus years of schooling, like it was that feeling of, oh, I could be successful was felt really, really good. It was kind of during grad school when I was starting to actually learn more sort of ADHD management strategies outside of just Adderall, which
I
like
was
sadly that
wondering.
was like my primary strategy in my undergrad was Adderall. It was
Mm-hmm.
Adderall. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, use a calendar. It's like, okay, cool. Actually not really sure how to use this calendar.
Right. No one taught you how to use a calendar. So, having a calendar, it's not going to do anything for you, but cause more paper on your desk.
I still remember that feeling of like being told to use a calendar and then being like, wait, so do you put this stuff in on the day it's due, on the day it's assigned? I just, it didn't make sense to me on how to actually use this calendar. And
Correct.
then it was during grad school where I realized if I don't figure out strategies, I am not going to do the kind of work professionally that I really want to be doing.
So you relied on Adderall at first, and
Mm-hmm.
then you realized there were things along the way that you couldn't just do with Adderall, like actually plan things in a calendar and know how to even start using the calendar. So where did you learn these behavioral strategies?
I wish I could remember where I learned these things. I think some of them I kind of figured out. But I developed this process of kind of extracting everything that I needed from my syllabus so I could throw away the syllabus. So the idea of like the first like week of classes, I would sit down for kind of like these extended power sessions. I'm like, okay, got the syllabus, got my regular calendar, got my 4-month dry erase calendar. I'm plotting everything out. I'm putting my professor's office hours in there, like everything out. Like, and I said, all right, here's the reading. I broke it up and like say, all right, I'm assigning myself these readings. And so everything, I created this kind of like command control center, like where I would work, so I can see visually everything that I had coming. Because one of the things I realized, if I'm just using a regular, like a Google Calendar or a weekly planner, I'm only looking 1 week at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And like in college and especially in grad school, like your professors will hand you that syllabus and not make one mention of the paper that's due.
Mm-hmm. I love that. The reverse engineering and how you called it a control center.
Yes.
So not only did you have control by seeing all of the schedules, but that helped you control your executive functions. It helped you control your planning in your life. Can you talk a little bit more about that? It's not just having the paper all around you.
Well, and I think part of it was, I spent a lot of time, and I think it's honestly, I think it's a worthwhile way to spend time is to like build the systems, tweak the systems, break the systems, improve the systems. Like, and I think that, yes, a lot of the things I spent time doing didn't work, but I needed to like go through that process in order to discover what does work. I know like in my own coaching program, one of the things I really share with people is like, you know, really learning to live well with ADHD involves, living a strategy-based life. And there are 10,001 different strategies out there, and 9,900 of them are not going to work for you. But when
Mm-hmm.
you find those 100 strategies that like you found this works for me, right? Like that's,
Stick with
and
it
you stick with it until it
until it
decides to run
doesn't
away
work
from you,
anymore.
right? Because
Yeah.
you lose interest. But like you
Right.
do this long enough and you're like, oh wait, I used to do this thing. I haven't done that in a long time. The old
Maybe I
tool or
should
strategy
do
is
that
now
again.
new and novel again, right? So it's
Exactly.
like this
Exactly.
this this sort of like roulette wheel of like strategies. Like, what am I going to use this month?
Yes. I love that. I love that. You also, I remember hearing your podcast 5 years ago when I first started coaching, and you had mentioned using an index card and putting all of your to-dos on one side and then 3 to 5 on the other side, and then crossing it out or throwing out the index card and then rewriting the list the next day and then choosing 3 to 5 on the other side. Do you do that? Do you remember talking about that? I think
Nope
it
and
was
nope.
on. Okay.
I'm like,
All
I think I
right.
did that for a minute. No, I mean, I've gone through so many iterations of sort of how I manage my tasks. One of the things that I realized is that I could stop looking for that. What's going to be that really robust system for task management? I actually allow myself to like, depending on how I'm feeling during the week, like sometimes it's literally a notebook. Sometimes it's on a sticky note. Sometimes I'm using Asana. Sometimes I'm using, the reminders app on my iPhone. Like as long as I'm cognizant of where it's going and where to check, like that's fine. Like it's, the challenging thing is when I'm doing more project management that involves other people, then I'm kind of stuck with like an Asana
The
type tool,
same. Mm-hmm.
you know. But I go through these periods where I'm like, well, I haven't checked in on Asana in a while. I should probably look at that. And it's a patterns kind of thing that it's like, and on one hand, I've created such a sort of robust systems based life
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not constantly doing like new and novel things, that it
Mm-hmm.
actually allows me to not have to be so on top of the task list, because like I
Mm-hmm.
know what I need to be doing from day to day, week to week.
Yep.
Right. It's more of like when I'm creating a new program or doing new projects, or maybe trying a different, like maybe a marketing approach, or like something that is just like not something that I've do on a repeated basis. That's when I need to really be more closely looking at that stuff. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, it's recognizing the more I say no to stuff, the easier life becomes, because I'm not like
Mm-hmm.
spread so thin.
I
But
love
then
that.
I kind of forget to look at my task list sometimes, because it's like I'm so in the routine and I got the systems and I got like what I need to be doing. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be working on this other project too. I totally forgot about that. So, that comes up
I
for me
hear
too
you.
sometimes.
I hear you, but it sounds like you give yourself grace and you're able to accept that things aren't always going to go the way that you plan. And I feel like that is something that comes with time and doing
Yeah.
the thing and trusting yourself, where so many people with ADHD, like you go back to your 19-year-old self when you first got on Adderall, you didn't know what it was like to be successful and achieve success. So you had to experience all of that to now get back to a place, or finally learn that it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to change things up, and things are going to change. So I like that. And you and I have a very similar program where we have a team and we need project management tools, like you said, Asana. The only thing that helps me with Asana, because I hate checking Asana too. It is not my thing. It never has been. It probably never will be. But the one thing that helps me check Asana is a scheduled meeting with my assistant or whoever the board is with. That weekly meeting, we finally just go through and use it as a checklist. Otherwise, I don't check it. Like, I can't put my to-dos in there
Yeah.
because they just don't get done. My to-dos have to go onto a paper. But the people I give the to-dos to and create the to-dos with, they can use Asana. So
The other thing that I think about sometimes too is like when I find that I feel some resistance to like going into Asana, or I'm just like realizing I'm not staying on top of these things as well as I would like to be. I realize it's time to kind of like take a step back and like check in on just like my overall well-being, and like where's my executive
yes.
function sort of tank like sitting at right now? Like, am I like
Gosh.
waking up regularly at like a half empty tank? That's something that, I've been doing this work for 10 years, and it's, I think that I need to be building in more vacation time into my life. And I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to figure that out. And one of the things that I've been sort of a big believer in around resilience is this idea of like, I know everyone with ADHD, they just want to be consistent. And I'm like, let go of consistency and focus on resilience. Because
Mm.
you can control the getting back up. You can't always
Mm-hmm.
control the falling down.
Exactly. I know we spoke about that on your podcast when we were talking about the 3C activation. Like, one of the C's in my program is consistency. And we said it's not doing the same thing every week. It's just continuing to be persistent and resilient, like you had
Yes.
mentioned.
Yes. And
Yes.
when you had mentioned too about the my podcast, that I've now have over 500 episodes. I didn't set out to do, be podcasting for 10 years and have 500 plus episodes. I set out to do 1 week at a time and to keep at it. And that's continues to be my focus.
I love that. You mean you're not going to write a book, write a screenplay, create a podcast with 10,000 episodes, and run a marathon all in the same week?
Yeah, no. I mean, I would love to have a book written by me. I just don't want to write the book. I mean,
Well, there's ways around that. We can talk about
I,
that
I
after.
I know, and I'm like, I would be the first one. Is like, I'm a pretty vulnerable, transparent person. I would be the first one to say, "Yep," and I hired a ghostwriter, right? Like all my ideas, just someone help me organize them and put them on the page.
Fair, fair. I love it. I love it. So I want to just rewind for a second. So you mentioned when your executive functions are low,
Mm-hmm.
giving yourself grace. And I know, me personally, as an ADHDer, working with ADHDers, that is the one thing when you don't have the intrinsic self-esteem, that it's so hard to give yourself that grace. Like, again, going back to that 19-year-old Eric, no, I'm going to stay up until like 6 a.m. and then wake up at 8 a.m. and
Mm-hmm.
rinse and repeat. And I'm going to measure my self-esteem on how productive and how I got that 4.0 or I got that A or that gold star. It's all on the contingency. So when would you say that, I'm curious for your personal opinion, people can get to a state where they check in with themselves and feel comfortable saying, you know what, I realize today is not my day, and I'm going to do that thing that I said another day, and I'm going to give myself grace.
I don't know if about like time frame wise. I think more of context, and it's through and with community. Like that, I think when we see other people and hear other people and are working with others who, have similarities to us, and it's easy for us to look at someone else and say, look at all the amazing things they're doing, and oh, why are they being so hard on themselves? And you see that enough and you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, I think other people are maybe thinking the same thing about what I'm saying. And I think that's why I'm such a huge fan of community and group based work with ADHD. Because
It's
I
the
think when we
best.
see ourselves and others, it's way easier to first give compassion to others. And I think that when you're doing that long enough, it's almost like a default where you just begin to give yourself that self compassion, right? It's sort of that idea of like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of beating myself up, right? Like it's not helping.
And it's a mirror, right? When you're listening to that other person, oh, wait, huh?
Yes.
They're like me. What am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm giving them so much compassion. I know Dr. Hallowell talks about vitamin C, and that's the connection, but that comes with
Right.
the community, right? And all of us ADHDers need that. We need that compassion, that connection, that community. I completely agree with you. I remember, and I push people sometimes into the group, even if they feel afraid of it, because I'm like, you're going to get so much out of one on one coaching. But at the same time, you want to be able to see what's going on and feel connected and know that you're not alone in this. There's so much grace that you can give yourself and be accountable with the help of other people, seeing that they're doing the thing and you want to do the thing too to build that momentum. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
absolutely.
So going back to the community piece is when people can start saying, okay, today is not a good executive function day. I am going to pick myself up tomorrow if I'm feeling better, and I'm going to try to start again.
And the other thing is too, when you start to really do this work with others, you start to realize too what is a you thing and what is a wrong environment thing, right? Because it's like when you feel like you're doing all the right things and yet you still feel like you're kind of hitting your head against the wall, or like you're just not making the progress. I encourage people to really like, that expression, if you can't change the people you're around, it might be time to change the people you're around.
I love that.
It's, and it's hard, and it's what's so interesting is I don't even like necessarily suggest that. Like, I think people come to this own realization of like this work environment or this relationship or that like this is not working for me, right? And in my coaching program, I don't know how far into the future you help your members kind of think about life, but we look at deadlines in a very literal way, thinking about like what's the legacy we want to live, right? Because I think one of the things we don't think about, the idea of like what regrets might I have like on my deathbed. This isn't a secret. Like people research this stuff, right? Nobody has ever said, I wish I worked more, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and so when people are having this realization of, oh, I'm on the wrong path, and which is can feel like a punch in the gut, and can be a punch in the gut when you realize like, oh, I spent a lot of time and money getting to this point, and this is not the path I want to be on. Like that is a hard truth to reckon with, right? But I tell people, so you know what, yes, that's hard, and shifting directions, in your adult life, like when you spent all this time and money to get to this point, and you realized, but think about this. Imagine, so let's say you're 40 years old and you have this realization of like, this is not the path I want to be on. And you still have 25, 30 years at least of your working
Mm-hmm.
life. Do you want to get to the end of your life and realize that I spent 30 years with the realization that this is not what I want to be doing,
Mm.
and continue to do it? Or do you want to maybe have a couple tough years shifting, changing course and
Yeah.
pursuing the thing that's going to light you up?
No, I love that. I love that. And like with every breakdown comes a breakthrough.
Mm.
And
Ooh, I like that.
thank you. And also, with what you're saying, I 100% honor that. And I would just, whoever's listening out there, I'd recommend you just stay in that, right? It's going to feel weird and uncomfortable and foreign and new. And sometimes you might get it right away. And sometimes it might take a few years, like you said, but don't go back. Don't go back. Please. Just because it seems easier, we need to put something out in front of us, whether it be journaling or a note saying, don't go back. Don't remember why I left, whether it be a divorce, whether it be a job that didn't serve us, whether it be friends who didn't serve us, because that out of sight, out of mind, we forget.
It's so true, and it's so interesting too. I've shared the stories with my my coaching group members that so one of the questions that we'll ask our members in group is to imagine that they got in a time machine, and even though all the rules of time travel say we're not supposed to go see your own self because it will break the space-time continuum, so we're going to forget about that for a moment. So we give people this sort of imaginary ticket into the future where they're actually, the purpose is to go see their future self, right?
Ooh.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we ask them, what do you hope you see yourself doing? And see if you like what you see your future self doing. And what would make you mad enough that if you saw yourself doing 25 years from now, would you get back in that time machine and go back to the present day and immediately start making changes? And it was a couple of years ago when I was doing this exercise with one of my groups, I had this realization myself of that, like, I was not happy in the marriage that I was in. And, so I spent, the subsequent part of it the following year really trying to address those issues. And I guess fast forward now, I'm divorced. And it's been a couple of years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's obviously divorce is hard, I think, like for anyone. And I'm really happy that's behind me because it was not a fun period in my life. But if I'm being real honest, I saw my parents who are still married and I would say have been unhappily married for 50 some years. And I am not doing that. Like, life is too short to do that. Trajectory. Was it hard? Yeah, it was one of the hardest things I ever dealt with. But I'm happier now than I think I've ever been. And I don't regret that at all. There's this saying that often the hard thing and the right thing is the same thing. And
Yeah.
so that was a good example of that. So I think that, like, when we're thinking about the context of our lives, and when we have a realization that, like, this is not what we want to be doing, like, yeah, maybe you thought it was, but all those things were just hypotheses, and now you're living it. And if what you're seeing right now is like, this is not working for you, I wouldn't say like jump ship immediately. I would say like sit with this thought, for, I would say, at least
30
3 to 6
days.
months. Yeah, I mean,
Or that.
yeah, I mean, I think part of it depends on like how much time and money have you put in to get to where you are at this moment before making that decision. I think if it's something that keeps nagging at you for months, then start maybe
Like a
find a
hammer
coach or
over
a
your head.
therapist. Yeah, like, and start processing this versus just jumping ship kind of impulsively, because then that could potentially create an even bigger mess that now you have to clean up. So it's obviously we want to make smart choices for ourselves, and those choices aren't always easy. And I know it could be really tempting when we feel something really strongly. We're like, oh yes, it's so clear. This is the thing I want to be doing. Well, great. Like, you have the life ahead of you. Start making the inquiries and the, kind of feeling out what might that look like before you just throw everything that you've already done away. Because,
Mm-hmm.
it's maybe you love the work you're doing, the environment
But
you're
you don't
currently
like your
working on.
boss, or
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And so and I've seen, especially with younger people too, or like, oh, I thought I wanted to do computer programming, but like, I hate it. It's like, well, how many jobs have you had in that? And they're like, just this one, but it's been like, okay, well,
So
tell
let's
me
take a
about
step
your
back for a
actual,
second.
right. It's like, tell me about the actual work environment you're in. Like, what don't you like about it? Oh, your boss expects you to work 90 hours a week. Yeah, I understand why you wouldn't like that. I think really looking at what are those decisions that we can make in our life when we realize that, yeah, this isn't what I thought it would be.
Mm. Wow. So you were a social worker, moved into ADHD coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And in the coaching realm, you're focusing on helping people move forward and seeing what they're moving towards,
Mm-hmm.
looking at that life purpose, looking at that vision, looking at their goals and working back from that. In the social work piece, it was a lot of looking at your inner child, right? Like thinking about what happened in the past and why it's influencing what's happening today. No?
For
Yes?
interestingly, like even when I had my clinical practice, I really was coaching. Like it was skill based.
Okay.
It was yeah, there's a lot of, I think, more emotional processing around like the challenges around ADHD or autism, because that was the other part of my practice. And so doing a lot of work around acceptance, which is also a big part of what we do in coaching as well.
Coaching.
Going back and like reprocessing, traumas like that, for me, wasn't the kind of therapist I was. Like, that's not what I did.
Gotcha.
And it's
Okay.
funny too, because I've talked to various coaches in the ADHD space, and they'll say, "Well, where'd you get your ADHD coaching training from?" Like, yeah,
I
so I
was a
have a
social
master's degree
worker.
in social work, like, and we actually are the
And that's
original
like 30
strength based,
credits. Exactly.
right? like, yeah. And so it's this idea of, and I think part of it is just like maybe not a full understanding of what each like mental health helping profession does in that context. But I think if there's any mental health profession that is most aligned with coaching, I think it's social work. Because it's all about leveraging strengths, using your understanding your environment, and how we can really pull in the resources from our environment to, live the life we want to live.
Yeah. And with that being said, I'm meeting with a social worker now to do EMDR. So we're
Me
actually
too.
doing a lot of trauma. I know we're doing a lot of trauma informed pieces and working with my inner child and IFS and all those things together. So for people who are listening out there and they're like, I don't know if I should do coach therapy or, both or what coach, it is complex. Like you said, there are some social workers or therapists who do some coaching. There are coaches who do not therapy, let me be very clear, but it will help you become aware and partner with you and maybe not go as far deep into the emotional component as a therapist would, but can still work on your emotional regulation as an ADHDer. So it is complex, but that's why it's important to speak to people and get into that community, like you mentioned, so you know what has worked for other people. Follow social media accounts, follow Eric at ADHD Rewired, and speak to people who are informed, who can help guide you into the right place.
Yes. And I think whether it's therapy or coaching, I think that it is so important to work with people who understand ADHD. When you work with someone who doesn't, I think it can often do more harm than good.
I completely agree with you.
And I think
I completely
especially
agree
in
with
like
you.
couples counseling, I've heard just like horror stories of, a mixed marriage, typical with a neurodivergent partnership, and the therapist didn't understand ADHD, and it just became this big blame session. And yeah, and I've heard that too many times.
Yeah. Yeah. Be informed. Make sure that you do your homework because this is a lot of emotional investment for you too. And it's very common, like you said, as far as damaging, where you can come out of this and say, I made no progress. I'm a failure, and feeling worse than you did when you started financially. You put the time and the energy, and it brings up these old feelings for you. So I appreciate that. Definitely make sure you've surveyed and
Yeah.
they're
Now,
ADHD informed.
a number of years ago, I was actually working with an online therapist that I found through BetterHelp, which, and there's a lot of issues with that company. Um, But so I was working with this therapist who, and part of one of the issues I was working with them with was on my like chronic sleep procrastination, right? Like I'm tired, I need to go to bed, but just one more thing, just one more thing. Let me just do one more thing. And this has been, a real struggle throughout my life. And after several sessions of me not doing the thing that we said we were going to do or not making that much progress on it, she just says, well, maybe you're just not actually motivated to work on this. I'm like, yeah, let me stop you right there. So for all the listeners who can't see Brooke's face, she had a beautiful cringe face from that, as I think
And
probably
it's
most
turning
listeners did.
bright red.
No, because it was just like, and it's so frustrating when you actually find a therapist who's, otherwise a decent therapist, but doesn't get it. And that hurts. It really does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. I've been through a lot of therapists, and I have liked all my therapists as a person.
Yeah.
But it was me who realized I had ADHD after all of the therapy, which is so common as a woman in their 30s.
Yeah.
Who's almost 40. So I can't say that for too much longer. But yeah, you got to make sure that you're with someone who understands. Okay, so I know that people can go follow you on ADHD Rewired and listen to 500 plus episodes of good, strong ADHD content. And I want you to share, and this is the hardest thing for ADHDers, but one piece of advice that you would leave your listeners with here today.
I think one thing. Okay.
Give me more than one thing. It's okay.
Okay, cool. When the very first thing that came to my mind was that like growth is possible. There have been so many things, even in my own life, and in so many of the members that I've worked with, who that at one point they thought the thing that they are now doing like would not even be a possibility, and like we're doing it, And I think with that, be really patient because growth is going to be slower than you want it to be. Because as ADHDers, we want growth yesterday, right? Like
Yes, we
we
do.
just want the results. And when you're going day to day, it's really hard to see the progress, which is also, I think, why it's really valuable to do this work in community because they can reflect back to you the growth that maybe you're not seeing yourself. So just, I think, believe that change and growth is possible and be patient with yourself and less is more. Like focus on less stuff in order to make more growth.
Yes. Beautifully spoken.
The piles aren't going anywhere. So take your time, but try not to get stuck.
And the piles can stay there. You don't need to focus on the piles right now. You can focus on something else and shut the door and put the piles in a box and don't come back to it for a little while. There's too many things going on in an adult's life to focus on everything and do everything right away. So I love how you said less is more. It doesn't mean that you have to have less stuff right away. It's just focusing on one thing at a time and, really executing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Eric, I know we can talk forever, but where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, join your coaching community, listen to your podcast, all the wonderful things?
Yeah, the best place to find everything I'm doing is at ADHD-rewired.com. You can, and then whatever podcast app you're listening to this on right now, search up ADHD Rewired and hit subscribe.
Oh, and you can find my podcast episode with you.
And after you leave Brooke a rating and review, if you haven't already done so, and then you can also leave one for ADHD Rewired. But definitely leave them for Brooke because they actually are really helpful. Learn about the coaching groups. They're intensive. They're 10 weeks long, 3 days a week. And we have a whole support alumni community for after. Because one of the guarantees we always make is that after our 10 weeks, you're still going to have ADHD. And we also have a virtual co-working community called Adult Study Hall. All of that is at ADHDrewired.com.
Eric, it's a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you at the ADHD conference.
I look forward to seeing you there as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helped you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.